Hi folks, this is Tony from Tacoma, Washington, and today I'd like to have a conversation with you about external safeties on handguns. Over the last few years, I've heard many gun experts make statements saying that if you're carrying a handgun for self-defense and it's equipped with a thumb safety, that you may not be as prepared to defend yourself as if your gun did not have a thumb safety. I'm hearing those experts make statements like, in defensive situations where milliseconds mean the difference between life and death, you don't want to come up short while you're turning off your thumb safety. Also hearing statements like, in defensive situations, you want a high efficiency handgun. You don't want anything to come between you and the shot, like turning off an external safety. Or, you want a gun to be like a Kodak camera, point and shoot. So that's the question that I'm hoping we can discuss here. Do we need to carry high efficiency point and shoot guns for self-defense? Or is there a place in today's world for guns with external safeties? Well, I believe the experts may have gotten it wrong in this case. I firmly believe that for the average homeowner and the average civilian concealed carry enthusiast, that a handgun with an external safety, a thumb safety, is a much better choice than a handgun without. Let me start this conversation by saying that we need to select the right tool for the job. A handgun equipped with a safety is a different tool than a handgun that does not have an external safety. And it's important that each user of a handgun select the right gun for their application. The experts say that when milliseconds count, you don't want anything to come between you and your shot, like turning off an external safety. That statement is absolutely true for a certain group of people. If I were a law enforcement officer and at any moment I might need to pull my gun into service and defend my life with it, those milliseconds would be essential to me, and I probably would not want a gun with a thumb safety in that application. However, for the average American civilian homeowner and average American concealed carry enthusiast, selecting the tool that is the best overall is the right choice. And I firmly believe that a gun with a thumb safety or an external safety is the right choice for the average American. Alright, so why do I think that, or why should you listen to me? Well, the bottom line is, you shouldn't listen to me at all. I don't have any special training. I'm just an average citizen. I've been carrying for about 5 years. I consume a lot of what the industry has to say via podcasts and YouTubes, but I don't have any special training and you shouldn't listen to me. I would certainly encourage you to apply your own critical thinking to this conversation. I basically want to make 3 points. The first point is that accidental discharges or negligent discharges they occur every day amongst the well-trained, even the law enforcement officers. Secondly, as civilians, we don't want to endanger or further endanger the people that we're carrying a handgun to protect. And finally, statistically, the odds are that we're more likely to have an accidental or negligent discharge over the course of a lifetime carrying a firearm than we are of actually needing that firearm to defend ourselves. Therefore, it's vital that we choose the right firearm that minimizes any chance of negligent discharge over one that keeps us ready at a millisecond's notice to employ that weapon in self-defense. Okay, point number 1. To err is human. People make mistakes. And accidental and negligent discharges happen every single day amongst the well-trained firearms user. Somehow we've gotten the idea that if we train hard enough and long enough, that we can eliminate accidental and negligent discharges. This simply is not true. It would be violating human nature to think that we would never, ever make a mistake with a handgun. And the proof is happening around us every single day. Somewhere in this country, on a daily basis, a law enforcement officer has an accidental or negligent discharge in his own squad room. This isn't because of lack of training. It's not because of carelessness. It's because we're human beings, and human beings make mistakes. So we need to stop thinking that if we train hard enough, that we can eliminate the accidental or negligent discharge. We cannot. We have to live with the fact that if we carry handguns in our everyday world, that as over the course of time, at some point in time, we will have a negligent or accidental discharge. I have two stories that I've heard along the way that I'd like to illustrate this point with. The first one happened in 2006 when a DEA agent was giving a firearm safety demonstration in front of a bunch of civilians. And during the course of that training seminar, this officer was demonstrating his Glock 40 caliber and accidentally fired a round off into the ground, striking himself in the foot. Here we have a highly trained federal law enforcement officer giving a class on gun safety who has an accident in that class. To me, that demonstrates that an accidental or a negligent discharge can happen anywhere at any time to anybody. The second story that illustrates the fact that accidental or negligent discharges are simply a fact of life we have to live with also comes from the law enforcement community. This was a patrol officer who was off duty, and he was carrying a Smith & Wesson J frame inside the waistband as he was doing his daily chores. Somehow his young daughter ran up in front of him and went to hug him around the waist. But as she did so, her hand hit the pistol and began to dislodge the pistol from inside the waistband holster. The officer instinctively grabbed for the pistol. So, as his daughter's pushing against the pistol, pushing it out of the holster, he's pushing against it, providing resistance, pushing it toward the holster. His daughter's thumb entered the trigger guard, and the officer reported that he could feel the hammer of the gun being cocked backward into his palm. Fortunately, in this case, the gun did not go off. But here we have a highly trained police officer carrying off-duty who came about as close as you could come to having a negligent or accidental discharge in his own home involving his own daughter. Again, this illustrates to me that accidental and negligent discharges are a fact of life we have to live with, we have to prepare for. Somehow thinking that we can train away the accidental or negligent discharge just is not realistic. And I think these two stories illustrate that very well. Okay, the next point that I want to make is that numerically or statistically, mathematically statistically, we are more likely to have an accidental or a negligent discharge while we are carrying our firearm than we are likely to need that firearm for self-defense. And therefore, it becomes essential that while we carry our firearm to protect our loved ones, that we also protect our loved ones from the firearm that we are using to protect them. Okay, so let's take a look at those numbers. According to gunfacts.com, Americans use firearms about 2.5 million times a year in self-defense or to protect themselves from a violent crime or some other crime. So, in essence, good guys use their firearms 2.5 million times a year to protect themselves from a bad guy. Now, what does that mean? Since there are 330 million Americans, simply dividing 330 million by 2.5 million, that means that on a general average, it would take 132 years for a law-abiding citizen to need his firearm in the act of self-defense. Well, that number may not be right. There's only about 100 million gun owners, so maybe rather than dividing that by every American, we should divide that, by the number of actual people in America who have guns. That's 100 million. So 2.5 million uses every year divided by 100 million Americans who have firearms, and that would be 40 years. So it seems to me the extreme spread of how likely the average concealed carry or average homeowner who has a gun for self-defense would be to actually use their gun in a self-defense situation would range somewhere between 40 years and 132 years. Okay, but how likely are we to have an accidental or a negligent discharge while we're carrying our firearm? Well, I had some trouble getting accurate statistics to use. What I decided to do was investigate quality control methods and how many repetitions could a person do before he was likely to make a mistake with those repetitions. For instance, on a quality control standpoint, if a person was assembling something, how many repetitions could they make before they would be likely to misassemble it? And that seemed to me to be about the best way to come about how a person might mishandle their firearm and have a negligent discharge. So in the quality control world, there would range about 1,000 to 4,000 repetitions before the average person would make an assembly mistake. Meaning, the more difficult the assembly is, the fewer repetitions before a mistake would occur, and the less complicated the repetitive action is, the more repetitions would take place before a mistake occurred. And that range for a complex repetition would be 1,000 repetitions, and for a less complicated repetition would be up to 4,000. Now, handling a firearm is pretty straightforward. Once you develop muscle memory, you know where the controls, you're familiar with your gun, you develop muscle memory to get it in and out of the holster. It becomes a fairly mindless task. The average person who carries, you put the gun on in the morning and you take the gun off at night. So he handles his gun at least twice a day. 365 times 2 is 730. So the average person who, does nothing but just put the gun on and take it off is going to handle it 730 times a year. If he can handle the gun 4,000 times before he's likely to make a mistake, that's just over 5 years. 730 or 4,000 divided by 730 is just over 5 years. So we could say that the average person would mishandle their firearm in such a way that may lead to a negligent discharge once every 5 years. Now, comparing that against how likely that same person is to need that handgun in a self-defense situation, we said that the shortest time frame for that was 40 years. So we can see that a person, just on the basis of these numbers, a person is 8 times more likely to create the potential for a negligent discharge than he is to actually need that firearm in a self-defense role. So I believe when you look at the overall picture of how likely the average person is to need their firearm in a self-defense role versus how likely the average person is to create the potential for a negligent discharge, it makes more sense to protect against the negligent discharge than it does to have the tool that is the most ready to use. So what I'm saying is I think thumb safeties or external safeties are vitally important because they protect us from ourselves. Again, to err is human, and what that external safety on a handgun does is it gives us that one extra chance that when human nature takes its course and we're about to make a mistake, that safety can come into play and give us that one extra chance not to have a negligent discharge. And that's important over the readiness of the gun to be ready at a millisecond's notice, simply based on the numbers that we're 8 times more likely to have a negligent discharge than we are to need that gun in self-defense. So my position is that if we really want to protect our loved ones, the best way to do that is to select the tool, the handgun that matches our need the most. And the handgun that matches our need the most is the one that has the least likelihood of a negligent discharge. All right, the last thing that I want to talk about are how realistic are these numbers against actual life? And I only have myself to compare against. So I've been a concealed carry enthusiast for just under 6 years. I just renewed my 5-year concealed carry license. I carry essentially every day. Um, Early on, I experimented with 2 different firearms, and then I discarded. I rejected both of those 2 firearms, and I selected my current everyday carry, and the gun I've been carrying for at least the last 4 years is a Glock 19. I know what you're going to say. Here I am. I'm arguing for thumb safeties, and I'm carrying a Glock 19 that doesn't have any external safeties. Uh, the experts are going to hate when I say this. I carry my Glock in condition 3 for all the reasons I just outlined. So I have 15 in the magazine and nothing in the chamber. And if I ever do need that firearm in a defensive situation, I'm going to have to rack the slide. And I know that creates issues. It creates the potential for mechanical issues. But I'm willing to take that chance because I trust the Glock 19, but I'm not going to carry it with one in the pipe um, without an external safety. I've just made that decision. Um, so comparing those numbers against my life, I've actually made what I would consider 3 handling mistakes that I think easily could have resulted in negligent discharges had the cards turned against me. Um, Before I selected the Glock 19, I was carrying a Springfield EMP, enhanced micro pistol, because for my whole life, I've been a 1911 guy, and I wanted a 1911 for carry, but I decided on the EMP. And one day I was holstering. It was in the morning. I had taken my shower. I was putting on my gun for the day, and I slipped my gun into the holster. A second later, I heard a thud. And what I had done is I had missed my holster. I wear my holster about the 5 o'clock position inside the waistband. and I had thought that I got the nose of the barrel, it started in the holster, and actually I hadn't. It was on the side, and when I thought I was pushing the gun into the holster, I was actually pushing the gun into midair. And I didn't even realize it until I heard the gun hit the ground. And the gun hit exactly barrel down. Well, I was carrying it in condition 3, um, so there was no chance the gun could have fired in that case. But the reason it was a mistake was one of my other 1911s that I had chosen not to carry was a Series 70, an old Series 70 that had a steel firing pin. Had that old Series 70 1911 been dropped on its barrel the way the Springfield EMP had been, that gun is very likely to have had a slam fire. So I would have launched a 45 caliber round through my bedroom floor on the second level, directly over my kitchen on the first level. And had someone been standing in the kitchen, that could have been a grave error. The second mistake I made in the 5 years that I've been carrying is one day I had taken my shower, I was putting my gun on for the day, and then I went to work. And that night when I was um, taking my gun off for the night, I realized my gun was still in my safe. So I had forgotten to put my gun in my holster, and I had gone through the entire day with an empty holster, but believing that I had put my gun in my holster like I always do. So you think, how could a person make a mistake like that? Um, I'm just left feeling that if I could make that mistake, where I could leave my gun in the safe believing that I had put it on for the day, that mentally I'm capable of almost any mistake. So at this point, I fully recognize that making the mistake that leads to a negligent discharge is really a fact of life. And the last mistake I made happened at the range. Again, I've been carrying my Glock 19 for about 4 years. I'm pretty used to the trigger. And I was at the range and I had an opportunity to shoot someone's M&P. And the trigger on the M&P is different. It feels like it's going to be the same, but it's not. So I raised the gun and I was heading toward the target. I started to put a little pressure on the trigger the way I do my Glock, and the M&P went off. It has a lighter trigger, and it stages differently than the Glock. And it went off accidentally. I can say it went off accidentally because I was at the range and I was pointed the gun down range. I struck the concrete floor, and of course it was down range, so nothing bad happened. But what it taught me was, it taught me that the unexpected could happen at any time. Here I was, I shoot somewhere in the vicinity of 3,000 to 4,000 rounds a year, and even with that much experience, I had a bullet get away from me at the range. The unexpected can happen anywhere. Negligent discharges are a fact of life that we have to prepare for, because at some point, if you carry a firearm in your everyday life long enough, eventually at some point you will have a negligent discharge. So let me say this one more time. There are different tools for different purposes. The police who need to be ready at a microsecond's notice, they're the guys who, when trouble happens, they're running toward the trouble. When they pull someone over, they don't know if they're talking to a good guy or a bad guy. They don't know if that person is desperate and may be about to attack them. And because they need to be ready and milliseconds count for them, I think a gun like a Glock 19 or any gun that would be described as high efficiency, low drag, a Kodak gun, point and shoot, any gun that is easy for them to get out of their holster and get a shot on target as quickly as possible, that's the right tool for them. But for myself, as an average American concealed carry enthusiast, a homeowner who keeps his gun for home protection, the tool that I need is a different tool. I don't need to prioritize being ready at that millisecond. Uh, I need to prioritize a weapon that helps me protect myself from me. Because to err is human, and I am only human. And my life experience in the last 5 years carrying my firearm has taught me that I do make mistakes. That even though I shoot my gun quite a bit, 3,000 to 4,000 rounds per year, that even though I've taken self-defense classes and I practice quite a bit, and even though I shoot my gun in IDPA competition, I still make mistakes. And I don't have the luxury of unloading my gun in a squad room where they have unloading barrels and devices that help me protect myself from myself. I unload my gun here at home around my family, where a mistake can be costly. Again, I see the industry pushing us in a direction of high efficiency weapons. I think the industry is pushing the average American in the wrong direction. I don't know if I'm right or not. I hope that you will listen to this and apply your own critical thinking skills to this conversation. If carrying a gun without a thumb safety is right for you, then I'm glad for you, good for you. But if you listen to this and you think about it and you think a gun with an external safety is the right tool for you, then I'm glad for that also. I just want you to make your own educated decision and not get swayed by what all the gun experts are saying. God bless America.